welcome back to The Scoop. We have had an amazing day and an amazing experience, and I'm so excited to be back with our final guest for the day. We are joined by Vanessa Santana, and she's an associate brand manager at Dove Haircare Innovation for Unilever. Welcome to the show, Vanessa.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. Now, today we're talking about DE&I and how we can move beyond box checking
Right.
to really power long-lasting change.
Mm-hmm.
And this morning you and I met at a really great moment, I thought, where we had a breakfast, where we were networking and you were chairing a table. Tell me, how important is it for event organizers to provide moments like the one we had this morning?
Absolutely. I think first and foremost, I just had an appreciation for the conversation. So again, thank you. I think it is very, very intentional why we met today. And I think it's part of hosting great events and having great experiences is ensuring that you're allowing for humans to actually connect on a deeper level, right? It's more than, hey, what company do we work at, right? It's more than that. It's beyond that. And I think that our conversation was so fruitful because we talked about the tougher things, right? DEI is messy. It's something that's hard for a lot of companies, a lot of people to talk about. And we were able to actually, surface level kind of dig into what are some of those issues, like tokenism, like performative allyship, like all of these things. So it's very important that events actually create spaces for genuine, authentic connection, because you never know where that will go. It could lead to this interview, which again, I'm glad to be here.
Me too. And we had an instant connection this morning. I really felt like there was something between us. Your energy is just
Thank
so
you.
amazing. And I knew that you had to come on the show because your insight is so important. Let's start with, how did you come to be here at EMS? You've got a great story.
Yes, thank you. So Rachel, she actually featured me. She's the head of content at Event Marketer, and I was actually featured in the Experiential in Color magazine last year, in which they highlighted kind of like top 10 rising diverse leaders in the industry. So yeah, I got that feature, and then we stayed in touch over the past couple years or so. And she was like, "You'd be a really great speaker for this DE&I about events, panel." And she wanted to get that representation of what it's like to be, a diverse person in the industry, having a lot of passion for equity and inclusion, and ensuring that that's ingrained in the work that I do as a marketer. So I'm here to speak on a panel tomorrow.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And at breakfast this morning, we talked a lot about the good news, which is we're seeing a lot of focus on DE&I. We're seeing a lot of panels having the conversations here. And as event organizers, we're often the people who need to say to our clients, hey, let's have a look and make sure that we inject and invite a little bit more diversity in terms of the voices for some of these topics. But in some ways, that's a little bit late, isn't it? When you get to content and who's on the stage and speaking, where should we start? What's the first step that we should take to design more diverse events?
Yes. I always say the first place we should look is inward, right? Taking an audit and assessment of where you are. It's hard to be an ally and an advocate when you don't know where you stand and what your place is as a business, as a person, etc. And so I always say, starting off with recognizing where you are on the spectrum, right? Are you like a non-diverse company who's just starting out? Are you a diverse company who has a lot of potential? Are you already there, even though there is no there, because it's an iterative process? I always say taking an audit as to where you are is very important, whether it be internally, what type of people do you have staffed on your event teams or on your marketing and brand teams? And then also looking externally, who is your consumer? Who is your audience, right? So we're at this event, which our industry, as we know, is not the most diverse. However, we are responsible for creating experiences for consumers who are diverse in a world that is diverse. So assessing who's in the room, who's actually invited to have a seat in the table. Do they have a voice? Because it's one thing to have a seat, but do you have a voice? Is that voice being amplified? Are you entrusted to actually lead? I think all of those things are important. So auditing where you are first is like the first place to start as it comes to diversity.
As a product manager, as a brand manager, as somebody who designs for people, talk a little bit about how you connect with your customers and use data to make good decisions on what is coming from your team.
Yes, I think as a brand marketer, I mean, data is everything. We're in this world of so much data. And it definitely informs decisions. There's a lot of data out there when it comes to purchase, and we have so much advancement when it comes to data and technology for getting the right insights on how consumers are buying your product. What are their psychographics like? What is their lifestyle like? So I always like to mix the kind of the science of data with the art of empathy, and knowing, okay, you can have all this data in the world, but at the end of the day, data is just information. What about talking to consumers? Get in those chats, have these conversations. Think about us. We're all consumers at the end of the day, right? We all have a lived experience, and not taking that lightly. Like, I take my identity as an Afro-Latina. Most people don't know that. I'm actually Afro-Dominican. I understand the Hispanic consumer because I am Hispanic. I also understand the Black consumer because I am a Black consumer. I understand being a woman. All of these intersections of identity, I think, are very important for us as people to understand and know that we can relate to that for our consumers. And our consumers also have similar psychographics. So again, just the combination of using data to inform your business decisions, but also having the empathy to recognize biases, recognize privilege, understand a culture, infuse yourself in the culture so you can better get to know that consumer and better serve them as you're designing products for them.
You said something this morning that I thought was really nice, and we were talking about hot tips and small changes that can make the world of difference.
Yes.
And you talked about thinking about accessibility and product design for people who may have a disability.
Right.
And then also making sure that when we come to events as event professionals, is that photo booth accessible to somebody who might be in a wheelchair?
Yes.
Or is it set at a height for people who are standing? And how that really shuts off that inclusivity for an important part of our audience.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, going to the fact that, again, our industry is not as diverse as it needs to be, we still have power, right? If, as people in this industry, we know what it's like. We've all been in situations where we haven't felt included, and I think we spoke about that earlier. Me and you as able-bodied people, we might not think about it all the time, but when you start making friends with people and actually understanding, some of the nuances and the issues that come with lack of accessibility, you start to think differently. And so framing that thought and that mindset, and like saying, okay, how do I ensure that this event is inclusive to all people who are disabled, people of color, of different sexual orientations, religions, etc. It takes that advocacy and thinking, kind of like, how do I make this experience one that's rich, regardless of where you come from in this world?
And you talk a lot about human connection.
Yeah.
Have you heard of the Human Library?
Tell me more.
Okay, so I think it's definitely right up your alley. It's this amazing movement. It actually started in Copenhagen in Denmark in the early 2000s. And it plays on this concept of the library, where you can go and have be presented with your prejudice and your bias by going and engaging with somebody from a background that you maybe have no experience with.
I love that.
Former convicts, people in the military, members of the LGBTQI community, from all different walks of life, designed to help people make that connection.
Right.
And step outside their comfort zone.
Yeah, that's awesome. I need to check that out.
You need to check that out. And I think that's one of those things, that human connection. You said something this morning that I thought was really nice too, is even though, say, I can't stand in your shoes, I can be empathetic.
Yes.
But I can also get uncomfortable. Tell me a little bit about your friend and how you encouraged her with Zumba to have that lived experience, right?
Yes. So I guess, like, first, to give context to the conversation, because we were talking about how, a lot of these systems, a lot of these issues we're dealing with as it relates to DE&I are systemic issues. There's systems that have been in place, right? We cannot boil, the ocean of issues, but we can control the way we show up, the way we ally, the way we learn about cultures that are not ours. And so I was giving you the example of how, a lot of times we talk about DEI, we overcomplicate the issues. It seems so vast. It seems like something that's unattainable, when it's like we can do the little things like integrate ourselves in cultures that are not ours. So I talked about how a friend of mine, she's a white woman from New York, and she's often like, man, I struggle with this perception of like people just think I'm a white woman everywhere I go and they don't get it. And I'm like, okay, cool, let's go to the Zumba class. And I took her to an Afro-Caribbean Zumba class. She was the only white person in the room, and she literally was like, oh, everyone was looking at me, I was the only white one. And I said, that's how I feel at work every day. I'm the only Black woman on my team a lot of times, and that's okay. But the more we put ourselves in those spaces to understand cultural nuances and actually immerse ourselves in culture, that is when we can actually understand other people and therefore better market to other people.
Let's talk a little bit about the well-meaning allies, okay? And so I think the reality is that a lot of people want to be better.
Yes.
They want to be a part of the change. What are some of the well-meaning but problematic ways that people pursue their allyship?
Ooh, we would probably need a whole nother hour, but I will say the top 3 that come to mind for me are, first and foremost, performative allyship, right? When you're doing something to gain kind of that validation and approval, or, hey, look, I did this, check, versus are you actually undoing the way you think, the way you show up? Are you open to iteration and learning? Because you're going to mess up, right? There's no magic badge that gets you perfect ally. Ally is a verb. It's active. Okay. You don't just get to choose that title. You earn that title. And I think that that's a thing that allies, and we're all allies, right? Like every community has a certain type of privilege, some more than others. But I always say, again, that is an earned title, not something that we just get to call ourselves, right? So performative allyship is number 1. The second thing I would say is tokenism, right? And as brand marketers, I think we're guilty of this a lot. A lot of people, right, with the rise of 2020, we said, oh, let's just feature more people of color. Let's say we care about Black lives. And it's like, okay, don't exhaust your one Black employee.
Mm-hmm.
Be conscious of don't exhaust your one Latino employee, right? Be conscious of how, you're using the same person and feeding into that same person for the same thing. So
and there's so much more than that.
Yes, right. So like I'm passionate about DEI. I'm also a marketer. So like we can talk about that too, right? So I think like going deeper than the surface, I think is a big thing. And then the last thing I will say is just because your question was around how do people kind of take the wrong approach, is I think over instating everything, right? It's like reciting the things that they listen to on a podcast or reciting the things that they heard in a book. Sometimes we just need to break the barriers down and just be human and talk and get to know people for who they are, and better understand them and form those genuine, authentic connections. Because when you know somebody and they're going through something, it then becomes more personal and you can then empathize and better understand. So that empathy is important, and that only comes from human connection and not seeing someone just for what they are. I can't see you as Fallon and say, oh, you're just a white woman. No, you're so much more than that, right? And you can't see me and say, oh, Vanessa's just a Black woman, right? So, yeah.
I love that. And I think it's so important for us to have these critical conversations. And for people who do want to be allies, be comfortable in being corrected.
Yes.
Feedback is a gift.
Feedback
is a gift. And as you said, allyship is active. It's a verb, and we can always be better. And there's nothing's going to shut it down faster than if somebody gives you the gift of, hey, Fallon, you've put your foot in your mouth then.
Because we remember our mistakes, right?
We remember our mistakes. And I can think about it, and we bonded a little bit over this. I have and I still feel ashamed about it. I have caught myself sometimes and I've assumed someone's pronouns. I've done it at work and I made a mistake, and then that person was gracious and kind enough to pull me aside and express it to me. And in that moment, you get to own it, apologize, and then commit
and move on.
And then move on and commit to doing better, as opposed to,
oh my gosh, they're attacking me. Because that's the thing. It's like, it's not, if you want to genuinely learn, you shouldn't take it as a personal attack. You should take it as, oh, this person's just trying to make me sharper and better. Because a lot of times, like marginalized groups, we face microaggressions and don't address them. So I think I'm at least grateful for the fact that we're now at a point where we can address people and call them out when, you know, they say the wrong thing. Because for years we haven't. So we should be embracing that more.
Absolutely. And I am so thankful that you are somebody who is paving the way and being a voice and really role modeling and helping us all be better. I am hopeful that this isn't the first or only time that we'll get to spend time together. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining us here on The Scoop.
Yes, thank you for having me on The Scoop.
Have a great session tomorrow.
Yes, thank you. I receive all of it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for your time.
Thank you.